When making a movie or TV show set centuries in the past, there's a general consensus about how these time periods are portrayed. If it's set in the Victorian period, it's probably going to be darkly lit with a stuffy tone. If it's in the Regency era, then bring out the empire dresses and love triangles, probably involving someone named Darcy. If it's set in the Rococo times, then it's going to look pastel-colored and opulent, until it's not. But if there's a story set in the medieval era, it can be basically anything. It all started with this particular tweet. And yes, I was very confused when I first saw it. But when you think about it, the concept of medieval Y2K makes a lot of sense. The Middle Ages have always been depicted in Hollywood, but had a unique presence during the late 90s and early 2000s. It really seemed that in the new millennium, there was a revived interest in the distant past. Medieval Y2K has a distinct style of blending 2000s aesthetics with medieval styles and settings. Think bright colors and peasant/milkmaid tops mixed with chainmail and town criers. It wasn't about accuracy, it was aspiration. And this style didn't only exist in the Y2K era. We still see some medieval inspirations in 2025 aesthetics. But how did this start? Why was the medieval times so popular in the new millennium? And how was this era interpreted? Because we're extra on this channel, we're going to explore how the Middle Ages have been reimagined throughout history, art, film, and fashion trends, and how that paved the way for the rise of medieval Y2K. In this video, I will be referencing some works that were set in the Renaissance. And yes, I'm aware it's a different era from the medieval times, but if you have an issue with me mentioning some Shakespearean works, it's been 500 years. Some things need to be let go. So grab your satchel. We're going to explore how the Middle Ages have been interpreted in popular culture and how it led into the glitzy, fantastical world of medieval Y2K. So now, let's get started. Retrospectively, the Middle Ages, lasting from the 5th to 15th centuries, doesn't have the best reputation, like it's literally been denounced as the Dark Ages. This came after the supposed stall of civilization and lack of cultural achievements. This era is often associated with feudalism, witch hunts, inquisitions, the plague. Like if it was the 1300s and someone is being weird and won't go away, a good way to tell them off is to say you'd rather get the plague than go out with them. There was also insane corporal punishments. Like if you want to look up medieval era punishment techniques, just be warned, that stuff is scary. But starting in the Romantic era, around the late 1700s, the Middle Ages started being reimagined as mysterious and enchanting. This started with the historical adventure/romance novel Ivanhoe, set in the 12th century, taking readers to a more chivalrous and adventurous past. The pre-Raphaelite painters also brought a sensual, mystical version of the Middle Ages. Given how long ago and not very documented this period was, medieval times was a playground for creative interpretation and myth-making. This was the era of knights, dragons, tarot cards, and courtly love. Many iconic fairy tales were rooted here. Does anyone remember the Sims medieval game? Like if you play as a monarch, you can throw people in the pit with a beast if they did something like use poison in any way. You can also flirt with someone's spouse at their own wedding, but some messy people still do that today. The medieval times and early Renaissance had been depicted in Hollywood at the start. It helped that stories like Robin Hood, King Arthur, and Shakespearean works were in the public domain. Their theatrical nature was perfect for the stage-to-screen adaptations in the 1930s and 40s. This was a great time for actors whose names started with Sir. Medieval films continued being popular in the 1950s, and this was when Hollywood really started embracing historically inaccurate costuming. Women in the medieval times didn't show their hair and didn't wear brightly colored, form-fitting dresses. These stylized interpretations helped viewers emotionally connect with the characters. They were intended to be trendy for the time, while offering maximalist visual drama. You could argue the historical films from the 50s opened the doors for a more aesthetic reinterpretation of the Middle Ages in cinema. In fashion, a medieval revival emerged during the late 60s and early 70s, heavily influenced by the psychedelic and folk music scenes. This style blended contemporary aesthetics such as short hemlines and loose-fitting designs with medieval-esque velvet fabrics, jewel tones, and exaggerated bell sleeves. This bohemian-influenced style had a pre-Raphaelite, good pagan witch type of vibe. While this wasn't an era-defining look, this was a micro-trend of the time, which is especially interesting to spot before we had Pinterest boards and TikTok trend cycles. With the popularity of vaguely medieval-styled Lord of the Rings novels and the Dungeons & Dragons game, the Middle Ages would take on a different style for a new generation. The commonly medieval set dark fantasy genre saw more mainstream visibility, which may or may not have featured some fan service. 80s medieval films are noted for looking sparkly, with romantic lighting and shimmering armor, continuing medieval inspirations as more stylized than historically accurate. By the 90s, movies such as First Knight and Braveheart took on a grittier, more realistic take on the Middle Ages, but the realism-based styling may or may not have matched with the movie's writing and performance styles. The highest-grossing movie of 1991 was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, where Snape told some guy that he'll cut his heart out with a spoon. But in more kid-targeted films, such as A King in Kid Arthur's Court and Quest for Camelot, there's a fusion of medieval settings with contemporary jokes and pop culture references. And this would be the basis for what we'd recognize as medieval Y2K. If we're being loose with the definition of medieval Y2K, you could argue that 1996's Romeo plus Juliet opened the doors for this trend. With this being a fast-paced Baz Luhrmann production, this movie takes place in the fictional Verona Beach, where Romeo, involved with his family's criminal team, does YouTube like the word I'm intentionally avoiding, falling in love with the daughter of a rival family's team. The star-crossed love story famously and infamously utilizes Shakespearean dialogue with heavy violence and contemporary 90s aesthetics, taking lots of inspiration from the increasingly mainstream rave culture. But the most famous scene of the film takes place in the Masquerade, which utilizes a medieval-ish aesthetic, with Romeo dressed as a knight and Juliet resembling a chapel painting. Despite critics railing this film as a disgrace to Shakespeare, Romeo plus Juliet was very financially lucrative, earning more than 10 times its budget, and becoming a cultural phenomenon, 1 year before the really massive one. Also, if you like the song Love Fool by the Cardigans, you can thank this movie for putting it on the map. This movie also influenced a past meets present mashup trend. Like here, there was Shakespearean language in the setting of an edgy 90s crime drama, with Luhrmann doing that again in Moulin Rouge, mixing 1900s Paris with the 1950s, while also including sort of recent pop songs. The success of Romeo plus Juliet helped launch a trend of modern-day adaptations of Shakespearean works, including Oh, inspired by Othello, Get Over It, based on A Midnight Summer's Dream, She's the Man, loosely inspired by Taming of the Shrew, which was also the inspiration for 10 Things I Hate About You. Interestingly, Kat's friend Mandela is a Shakespeare fan and dresses in a vaguely medieval/Renaissance inspired style, with Shakespeare being adapted for a new generation, spoken in dialogue they can actually understand, and the Oscar buzz surrounding Shakespeare in Love. There's a growing glamorization of the medieval and Renaissance period. Again, it may not have been the dominant style, but it was definitely visible. For instance, Betsy Johnson, known for her playful and eclectic styles, used medieval/Renaissance inspirations for her fall-autumn 1997 show. Some of these styles were also ahead of their time. The blend of historic references and modern interpretations was shown in Ever After. Though technically set in the Renaissance, Ever After is often listed under the medieval Y2K umbrella. This film tells the story of Cinderella as a work of historical fiction instead of a supernatural-based fairy tale, like Leonardo da Vinci is in here, taking the place of the fairy godmother. Though she's still downtrodden, Cinderella, or Danielle, is strong-willed, educated, and firmly makes decisions for herself. She openly stands against injustice, turns down the offers of a guy who thinks he can be weird just because he has money, punching her stepsister right in the face because that's what she gets for acting up, and deciding for herself that she's going to the ball, despite her stepmother's orders. The love story between Danielle and the prince also isn't based on love at first sight. Even though their first interaction has her throwing onions at him, thinking he's a thief, Henry likes Danielle because of who she is, especially her wisdom and spiritedness. We see their relationship developing, closer resembling contemporary romance stories. While stylistically, Ever After is pretty historically accurate to the Renaissance, at least to me, there are some pre-Raphaelite inspirations. Like the scene of Danielle swimming in the lake does have an Arthur Hughes vibe. And at the ball, her legendary fairy dress is the most modern-looking costume in the film. It's very 90s fantasy editorial, but I don't like how Henry spoke to her when he found out that she's, forcibly, a servant. He liked her wisdom and stuff. What happened to that? And then her stepmom sells her to that creepy guy. When it rains, it really pours. But Danielle takes good care of herself. Soon after, Henry is apologetic and even brings back her shoe. He kneels before her not as a prince, but as a man in love. And for lying to nobility, the evil stepmom and stepsister now have to work as servants. Danielle and Henry not only lived happily ever after, but they lived. While Ever After doesn't have too many in-your-face references to modern times, Danielle's success, driven by her wit, compassion, and inner strength, mirrors the growing waves of girl power in popular media, which would soon become overtly commercialized. On top of that, she even inspired an iconic Da Vinci drawing. We love a muse. While Ever After was a historical romance, during the 2000s, the fantasy genre was flourishing, with the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings series, which, despite its Middle-earth setting, evoked a medieval aesthetic, with author J.R. Tolkien, being a professor of Old English at Oxford, infused the Lord of the Rings with some medieval characteristics, particularly the mythologies and non-industrialized landscapes. Also, some of the characters have an ethereal, storybook character type of mystique, and their flowing draping costuming definitely gives off an England in the 13th century type of feel. If you're a costume design fan, you'll notice this series definitely delivered on that. And come to think of it, this particular blonde wig was huge in 2000s fantasy media. The Lord of the Rings series also featured the Enya song May It Be, where many of her songs has a mythical, timeless sound, and Enya herself definitely gives off a celestial type of energy. I remember when I was a kid, for some reason, the Macy's store that was closest to me would regularly play Only Time, and it became a meme for like 5 minutes in 2016, I think. That was fun. While The Lord of the Rings was giving medieval Y2K in a fantastical, artistic sense, it was Shrek that really blended medieval fairy tales, Disney especially, with an edgy, contemporary humor style. While Aladdin and Hercules played with modern humor in ancient settings, Shrek felt more adult, sort of, referencing contemporary pop culture and modern slang in settings where that sort of thing didn't exist was exactly what the irony-obsessed 2000s public wanted. This style would be replicated in Hoodwinked and Happily Never After, to varying levels of success. I don't see these movies compared to each other too much, but A Knight's Tale feels similar to Shrek in that both of these movies take a medieval setting and stylize this era to a point where it feels brand new. But A Knight's Tale is slightly more sophisticated. When you think about it, giving a story a medieval setting allows for more flexibility for the tone and aesthetic. Like if you were to set a movie during the Victorian era, there's a set idea of how that period looked and what was going on. But because the Middle Ages were centuries ago, and there aren't too many historical documents from that time, filmmakers can insert any tone or scenario they like. And in this case, it's a lighthearted action comedy. A Knight's Tale focuses on a peasant who poses as a knight of noble descent under the name Ulrich and competes in tournaments. There's a lot of achronicity here, and it's all in the name of aesthetics. We see this in the first scene at the jousting tournament with a 14th century crowd singing or chanting, "We Will Rock You." The song is a massive sports anthem. Yeah, I get it. William's eventual boo, Jocelyn, is witty, clever, and flirtatious in a way. William is gaining more of a name in the jousting circuit, and even becomes a bit of a local icon. That's not the reason Jocelyn is into him, but still, they're into each other. While William's styling is far from being historically accurate, and if it were, I don't think Heath Ledger fans in 2001 would want to see that, Jocelyn has the most contemporary influences in this film. Her liking of sheer fabrics, French string designs, and streaked spiky updos just screams early 2000s. From the audience's point of view, we can see why Jocelyn is the cool girl of the story, playing a part in the modern, trendy aura of the film. Even Christiana's twin tails evoke 2001 when this movie was released. Jocelyn intentionally wears green at the banquet because William's tunic is green. This color is typically associated with the medieval era, but the design of both of them resemble a VMA red carpet look. Their matchy-matchy style is giving a bit of Britney and Justin if you squint. And if you were to ask me, the dance scene with Bowie's Golden Years is the signature scene in this film. This movie features a lot of 70s music to capture the spirit of the era, like with using rock music for rebellious peasants and glam rock with scenes in more formal settings. Director Brian Hedgeland stated that he used this type of modern music to help audiences emotionally connect with how powerful music felt to people of the Middle Ages. I'd say the reason 70s music was chosen was because of how rebellious and groundbreaking rock music was at that time. This matches the energy of William. In a time period where it was impossible to elevate in class, he refused to live the way he was expected to. While he's not of nobility, he turns the tables by becoming a knight, defying the rigid class system that says otherwise. Another interesting use of achronistic music was when Jocelyn told him that if he loves her, he will lose. He gets beat up as Get Ready plays. He gets really hurt from this joust, but at least Jocelyn feels bad about this. He later gets reunited with his dad, showing that knighthood offered him more opportunity than just public glory. It gave him a chance to rebuild important relationships. After his true identity is revealed, Jocelyn accepts him, but he's still arrested and taken to the stocks. But technically, he never broke the law because he's a descendant from an ancient royal family. He's then knighted as Sir William, wins a joust, and the movie ends with a kiss. While greatly differing from the era it portrays, A Knight's Tale focuses on individuality and empowerment, values that strongly resonate today. Setting a rags to riches story in a time where that couldn't happen can be even more riveting. Plus, the romance subplot is based on genuine connection, mutual attraction, and the gradual development of feelings. Yes! Interestingly, the movie would become adapted into a Manchester-based musical that premiered just 3 months ago as of writing this. Maybe it's fate. Even in films that aren't the typical, bright, flashy, medieval Y2K style, 2004's King Arthur still has a made in the 2000s type of feel. This movie continued the trend of showcasing myths as realistic and edgy, in the same vein of Gladiator, Troy, and Alexander, telling a revamped version of the King Arthur mythology, but make it brooding and sexy with a love triangle. It's even more so a work of its time, as Keira Knightley's character goes into the third act battle wearing low-rise pants and a crop top. I find it interesting that Hugh Dancy plays Galahad in King Arthur because in the same year, he would star in another medieval movie. Ella Enchanted is quite something. Based on the 1997 novel of the same name, which retells Cinderella with fantasy elements such as fairies, ogres, and giants, Ella and the prince also get to know each other well before the ball, and it's not exactly love at first sight. While the book is a straightforward fairy tale, the movie adaptation satirizes the genre, even directly mentioning the Grimm brothers. We see references to contemporary youth culture, including magazines, heartthrobs, wooden escalators, and people standing against authority, which you could not do in the Middle Ages, and a soundtrack of modern-ish songs. This makes a lot of sense. Lots of popular music, especially from the 60s and 70s, were theatrical and expressive, which further emphasizes the lighthearted and whimsical tone of this movie. After a tone-setting cover of Strange Magic, we're introduced to Ella of Frel, the infamous fairy godmother Lucinda, wearing a crop top and Carrie Bradshaw skirt, doesn't like how difficult she is, so she gives Ella a gift of obedience, no return policy. After her mom passes away, this curse is a secret that only she can know about, not even her dad. As Ella grows up, her style is relaxed and natural looking, in a boho chic type of way, while her stepfamily does McBling maximalism, if that existed in a storybook. Of course, we see that Ella is very down to earth, while the stepfamily is very in your face, though obnoxious personality-wise. It's safe to say that her dad marries Dame Olga for her money. One of the stepsisters is the president of the King Char fan club, even though he and the king are the reason for the segregation of the kingdom. For clarity, this is just segregation of the mythical creatures. As Prince Char makes a public appearance and runs away from his own BTS army, he runs face to face with Ella, who doesn't need his chivalry. He also likes how mean she is to him, because it's so different from what he's used to. Interesting. And he does the "you're not like other girls" thing because, of course. It doesn't take long for Hattie to discover Ella's curse, and to put her down even more, she makes her shoplift at the mall, where she can literally freeze when told so. Ella has reached her breaking point when her stepmother makes her say to her closest friend that she never wants to see her again. She cannot continue living with this curse. The household fairy gives Ella her boyfriend, a talking book, who will help her find Lucinda. She begins this new chapter of her life by walking out of this toxic home. Along the way, she meets elves, who can only be performers, not lawyers, and ogres, who the prince saves her from. He goes along the journey, and they're flirting. Just a little bit. They almost find Lucinda at the Giant's Tavern, but they just missed her. She was busy turning up. But that gives time for Char and Ella to get closer. He respects her autonomy, but the giants don't as much, which starts the, in my opinion, signature scene of the movie where Ella sings Somebody to Love. Initially, this scene was going to have a more classic fairy tale song, but something more recognizable and relatable was found to be a better fit for this scene. During this sequence, the elf gets together with a girl who's larger than life, literally, and at the fireplace, Char and Ella find that they have a lot more in common than what meets the eye. They kiss. It wasn't in order. The 2000s rom-com vibes take a turn to the Middle Ages when the Jafar-esque villain learns about Ella's curse and sees the perfect opportunity. If she can't say no, then why not have her take care of Char? It happened to his brother, so why not his nephew? All Ella can do is be chained to a tree, and after the elf makes a cheeky comment about that, Lucinda magically appears, but all she does is give her a new dress. I wouldn't complain. Ella can only get rid of this curse herself. Having someone else do it would go against the point. While standing alone with Char, dagger in the air, she tells her reflection that she'll no longer be obedient. And because this is a command, the curse has no choice but to listen. Finally setting herself free, she rescues herself by making a choice within the rules of her constraint. While historically, especially in the time when this movie is set, obedience was a cornerstone of virtue, but it can also feel like a prison, making way of more Y2K sensibilities of, you're allowed to choose your own path, which is kind of what the elf does. After Ella goes to prison for pointing a dagger at Char, she escapes with the help of her new lawyer. A lot happens at the coronation. The book becomes human again, Ella tells Char everything mid-fight, and the king accidentally gets rid of himself because he's that much of a flop. Ella and Char marry, which sparks the finale musical number, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, where Ella's wedding dress is turned short and kind of 1970s inspired. Y2K moment, costume changes were massive in this time. I guess Ella wearing something not typical in this environment demonstrates a celebration of who she is. She no longer has to live with a curse. Her new chapter of freedom has begun. You can say one of the last medieval Y2K films was Aragon in 2006, which despite being successful financially, I only found out it existed while making this video. Like the Harry Potter series, this is another underdog/chosen one narrative, and despite the mythological setting, this movie was intentionally designed to be shown on J14 magazine posters. For the rest of the 2000s, this microtrend was still around, but mostly on TV. There was the British fantasy TV series Merlin, which focused on Arthurian legends with characters who act like modern young adults, with the necessary modernized styling. There was also the Wizards of Waverly Place episode of Alex's Journal, where she writes herself fanfictions about her crush. Her fantasy world involves love, knights, and sharp metal, and afterwards, the style wasn't around anymore. As fantasy films were becoming more serious, and especially with the Shrek series coming to an end, the popular portrayal of medieval times entered a new era. Much like the 90s, in 2010s and 2020s media, the Middle Ages were depicted as gritty, mature, and with a kind of grayscale color palette. This was shown in Vikings, The King, The Witcher, and House of Dragon. The bright colors and audience winking of the 2000s just wasn't in vogue anymore. There was also CW's Reign, which focused on a Twilight-esque version of the life of Mary, Queen of Scots. Style-wise, there's a blend from deeply medieval looks to 1950s Hollywood. There's also quite a few off-shoulder cuts and men in vests and trousers. That definitely has modern inspirations, but it's not really done in a satirical, self-referential style. While the fun medieval times wasn't really around in TV or movies anymore, the world of fashion told a different story. We see medieval styling all the time on high fashion runways. There was Elie Saab for Fall/Winter 2017 and Paco Rabanne in Autumn/Winter 2020, and a lot of Renaissance inspirations for the Chanel Fall/Autumn 2013 show, and Alexander McQueen for that same season and Spring/Summer 2017. This is why, if you want to really understand trends, you need to know fashion history. The 2018 Met Gala had the Heavenly Bodies theme, which were heavily based on medieval art and popular figures. Zendaya in particular evoked Joan of Arc. In 2020, I remember bardcore being popular. People took all the popular songs we know of and turned it medieval. And with the renaissance of niche aesthetics, medieval core is one of the microtrends of this year. This includes elements like flowing lines, chainmail, and elaborate headpieces. Really, a lot of contemporary styles are based on throwbacks, so why not take it really back? Chapel Roan uses a lot of medieval motifs. She was also Joan of Arc in the 2024 VMAs. This fairy tale styling emphasizes her performance art vibes. She's a part of a movement because this is a style we see on red carpets and other formal events nowadays. And how could I not mention the tweet that started it all? Pink Panthers used a medieval motif for her Close to You music video. And recently, she seems to be playing with centuries ago styles, like the Tonight video had a Rococo theme. And while I'm at it, leave a comment if you want me to do a video on the Rococo aesthetic. The medieval Y2K trend could be attributed to the fascination of blending time periods, the fantasy craze sparked by Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings, and audiences craving a style that was more approachable and comforting, like from a fairy tale, in a fast-paced, tech-driven world. I'd say that given how rough and not easy to live in the medieval times were, something like medieval Y2K can rewrite a pretty rough chapter in history and turn it into something fun and whimsical. These stories can be backdrops for adventure and self-discovery. While it may not be the most realistic depiction, that doesn't mean we can't have fun otherwise. Not everything needs to be about accuracy. It could also be about possibility. For more real-life applications of self-growth, you can check out my Patreon, where I post exclusive audios which you can't find anywhere else. I currently have a video on how to get unnecessary negativity off your back, and there are lots more to come. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!